The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Westminster Abbey, as young Emma adjusted her pale pink dress for the 100th time. At just 8 years old, she had been chosen as the lead flower girl for what everyone was calling the wedding of the century. Her small hands trembled as she held the basket filled with white rose petals, each one carefully selected by the royal florists. Behind her, 6 other flower girls stood in a perfect line, their dresses shimmering like fairy tales come to life. Each girl had practiced walking slowly and gracefully for weeks, but now that the moment had arrived, butterflies danced in their stomachs. The youngest, little Sophie, was only 4 years old and kept reaching up to touch the delicate tiara placed on her golden curls. The page boys, dressed in miniature military uniforms with shining buttons and perfectly polished shoes, stood at attention near the great doors. 10-year-old James, the eldest among them, felt the weight of responsibility on his small shoulders. He would be leading the group, carrying the bride's train with careful precision. His uniform was identical to those worn by the royal guards, complete with a small sword at his side that made him feel both proud and nervous. Lady Catherine, the wedding coordinator, moved between the children like a gentle but firm conductor preparing her orchestra. She had been planning royal weddings for 20 years, but this one was special. The entire world would be watching, and these children would be part of history. She knelt down to Emma's level, her kind eyes meeting the young girl's worried gaze. "Remember, dear ones," Lady Catherine whispered to the group, "you are not just walking down an aisle today. You are carrying the hopes and dreams of a fairy tale that millions of people around the world want to believe in." The children listened with wide eyes, suddenly understanding that they were part of something much bigger than themselves. The sound of organ music began to drift through the ancient stone walls, causing all the children to straighten their backs and take deep breaths. Through the partially open doors, they could see the abbey filled with guests dressed in their finest clothes, feathered hats, and sparkling jewelry. Television cameras were positioned at every angle, ready to capture their every step for people watching in countries they had never heard of. Emma peeked through the gap in the doors and gasped softly. The abbey looked like a magical kingdom, with flowers arranged in magnificent displays along every column and archway. Hundreds of candles flickered in the dim light, creating an atmosphere that seemed to transport everyone back to medieval times when knights and princesses roamed the land. The other children gathered around Emma, each trying to catch a glimpse of the spectacular scene awaiting them. Young William, one of the page boys, whispered that he could see his grandmother in the 3rd row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Another flower girl, Charlotte, pointed excitedly at the choir dressed in their white robes, looking like angels ready to sing the couple into their new life together. As they waited for their cue, the children could hear the murmur of excited voices from the congregation. Important people from around the world had traveled to London for this moment, and the children were about to walk past presidents, prime ministers, movie stars, and members of royal families from distant kingdoms. The thought both thrilled and terrified them. Lady Catherine checked her watch and smiled reassuringly at her small charges. In just a few minutes, the great doors would open fully, and they would begin their procession down the longest aisle any of them had ever seen. The red carpet stretched ahead like a river of velvet, leading to the altar where the groom waited with barely contained excitement, his military uniform decorated with medals that caught the light from the stained glass windows above. The massive doors of Westminster Abbey swung open with a sound that seemed to echo through time itself. Emma felt her heart skip a beat as the full majesty of the ancient cathedral revealed itself before the small procession. 2,000 guests rose to their feet in unison, creating a rustling sound like autumn leaves in the wind. The children stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sea of faces turned toward them with warm, expectant smiles. James, the head page boy, was the first to step forward onto the red carpet. His polished shoes made soft clicking sounds against the stone floor beneath the velvet runner. Behind him, the other page boys followed in perfect formation, their small hands gripping the silk train of the bride's dress. The fabric was so delicate and beautiful that it seemed to float rather than touch the ground, covered in thousands of tiny pearls that sparkled like captured starlight. Emma took her first careful step, remembering to keep her chin up and her shoulders back just as they had practiced. The weight of everyone's attention felt heavy, but as she looked down the endless aisle, she saw nothing but friendly faces filled with joy and wonder. Some guests were already reaching for their handkerchiefs, moved by the sight of the children participating in such a momentous occasion. The organ music swelled around them, filling every corner of the abbey with its majestic sound. The melody seemed to carry the children forward, giving them courage with each note. Sophie, the youngest flower girl, had stopped looking nervous and now wore a bright smile as she scattered rose petals with enthusiasm, occasionally throwing them a bit too enthusiastically, causing gentle laughter to ripple through the nearest guests. As they moved deeper into the abbey, the children passed beneath soaring arches that had witnessed centuries of history. Kings and queens had been crowned in this very place, and now these ordinary children from across the kingdom were walking where royalty had walked for nearly 1,000 years. The weight of history seemed to settle gently on their young shoulders, making them stand even taller. The television cameras followed their every movement, broadcasting the magical scene to viewers in countries around the globe. In living rooms and town squares, on phones and tablets, millions of people watched the children's procession with hearts full of happiness. Parents pointed at their screens, telling their own children to watch the little princes and princesses making their way down the famous aisle. Halfway down the carpet, Emma caught sight of her own parents sitting in the designated family section. Her mother's face was glowing with pride, and her father was recording everything on his phone, determined not to miss a single second of his daughter's moment in the spotlight. Seeing their encouraging smiles gave Emma a burst of confidence, and she began to truly enjoy the experience rather than simply endure it. The page boys were handling their responsibility with impressive grace, keeping the bride's train spread out perfectly behind them as they walked. Young William had worried all week about tripping over the delicate fabric, but now he moved with the steady precision of a practiced royal attendant. The other boys matched his pace exactly, creating a beautiful picture of coordination and care. Charlotte, one of the middle flower girls, had developed a special technique for scattering her petals in perfect arcs, creating beautiful patterns on the red carpet. The guests nearest to the aisle watched in delight as the children transformed the already magnificent space into something even more magical. Each petal that fell seemed to carry with it the innocence and joy that only children could bring to such a formal occasion. The choir's voices joined the organ music, creating a sound so beautiful that several guests were moved to tears. The children felt as though they were walking through a dream, surrounded by music that seemed to come from heaven itself. The combination of the ancient setting, the magnificent music, and the knowledge that they were part of something truly special filled each young heart with a sense of wonder they would remember for the rest of their lives. As the children reached the middle of the abbey, something unexpected happened that would become part of wedding legend. Little Sophie, the 4-year-old flower girl, suddenly stopped walking and stared up at the magnificent stained glass windows above. The afternoon sunlight was streaming through the colorful glass, painting rainbow patterns across the stone walls and creating the most beautiful sight she had ever seen in her young life. The other children stopped too, following Sophie's gaze upward. Even the page boys, who were supposed to keep the bride's train moving, paused for a moment to appreciate the breathtaking beauty above them. The ancient windows told stories of saints and angels, and in that moment, with the light dancing through them, they seemed to come alive before the children's eyes. The congregation noticed the children's pause, and instead of feeling impatient, they too looked up at the windows. It was as if Sophie's innocent wonder had reminded 2,000 adults to stop and truly see the magnificent space around them. Cameras captured the moment when an entire abbey full of people shared in a 4-year-old's sense of awe and appreciation for something beautiful. Emma gently took Sophie's hand and whispered, "Come on, little angel, we have to keep walking to the altar." Sophie nodded seriously and resumed scattering her petals, but now she did so while occasionally glancing up at the windows, as if the colorful glass figures were old friends encouraging her along the way. The children's brief pause had actually made their procession even more perfect, giving the photographers time to capture some of the most beautiful images of the day. Years later, those pictures would hang in museums and history books, showing the moment when childhood wonder met centuries of tradition in the most natural and touching way possible. As they continued forward, the children began to notice individual faces in the crowd. There was a grandfather wiping away tears of joy, a young mother holding her baby up to see the procession, and children pressed against the edges of the pews, waving excitedly at the flower girls and page boys. The formal ceremony suddenly felt warm and personal, filled with human connections that made each step more meaningful. James, leading the page boys, caught the eye of his older brother, who was serving as an usher near the altar. His brother gave him a small thumbs up and a proud smile that made James's chest swell with confidence. The other page boys noticed the exchange and felt their own sense of accomplishment growing with each step they took without incident. The bride's train continued to flow behind them like a river of silk and pearls, and the page boys were managing it with the skill of experienced royal attendants. They had practiced this moment dozens of times, but nothing could have prepared them for the actual feeling of being surrounded by such grandeur and importance. The weight of the fabric in their hands connected them directly to the bride herself, making them essential participants in her special day. Emma realized they were getting close to the altar when she could clearly see the groom's face. He was watching their approach with a mixture of nervousness and delight, obviously moved by the sight of the children who would soon be followed by his beloved bride. His military uniform was covered in medals and decorations that told the story of his service to the country, and now he was about to begin a new chapter of service to his future family. The music grew even more powerful as they approached the front of the abbey, and the children felt as though they were being carried forward by the melody itself. The organ pipe seemed to sing just for them, celebrating their successful journey down the aisle and welcoming them to the most sacred part of the ceremony. Behind them, the massive doors remained open, waiting for the bride's entrance, but for now this moment belonged entirely to the children, who had charmed an entire nation and captured the hearts of viewers around the world with their grace, innocence, and natural ability to find wonder in even the most formal of occasions. The children finally reached the altar area, and Emma felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her as she took her designated position to the left side of the magnificent space. The altar of Westminster Abbey rose before them like something from a fairy tale, decorated with thousands of white flowers arranged in cascading displays that seemed to flow down from heaven itself. Golden candlesticks held tall white candles that flickered gently in the slight breeze, created by the movement of so many people. James and the other page boys carefully arranged the bride's train in a perfect semicircle at the base of the altar steps. They had practiced this moment countless times, but the actual silk fabric felt different from the practice materials they had used. It was lighter and more delicate, requiring them to work together with gentle precision to create the beautiful display that would serve as the backdrop for the ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the center of the altar, his ceremonial robes making him appear like a figure from history itself. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at the children, clearly delighted by their successful procession. He had officiated many important ceremonies in his long career, but the presence of children always added a special warmth and meaning to even the most formal occasions. Sophie, still enchanted by everything around her, discovered that from their position near the altar, she could see even more beautiful details of the abbey. The carved stone figures along the walls seemed to be watching the ceremony with approval, and the golden decorations caught the light from hundreds of candles placed throughout the sacred space. She whispered to Charlotte that the abbey looked like the castle from her favorite storybook. The other flower girls arranged themselves in a graceful line, their pink dresses creating a beautiful contrast against the white flowers and golden decorations. Each girl held her empty petal basket with pride, having successfully completed their most important job. Their faces glowed with the satisfaction of a task well done and the excitement of being part of something truly magical. Emma looked back down the long aisle they had just traveled and felt amazed by what they had accomplished. The red carpet stretched behind them like a path through history, marked by the rose petals they had scattered along the way. The guests were all still standing, their faces turned toward the great doors where the bride would soon appear, but many were also stealing glances at the children with expressions of pure delight. The page boys stood at attention beside the altar, their small uniforms making them look like junior members of the royal guard. William straightened his shoulders with pride, remembering his grandfather's stories about serving in the military. Today, he felt connected to that tradition of service and honor, even though his duty was to help create a moment of beauty and love, rather than to protect the realm from danger. The organ music began to change, signaling that the bride's entrance was about to begin. The children felt a new wave of excitement and nervousness, knowing that their part in the ceremony was far from over. They would need to remain perfectly still and quiet during the entire service, which would test their patience and self-control in ways that all their practice sessions had tried to prepare them for. From their position near the altar, the children had a perfect view of the entire abbey. They could see the distinguished guests in their finest clothes, the television cameras positioned to capture every moment, and the choir members who would soon fill the ancient space with their voices. The magnitude of the occasion was overwhelming, but instead of feeling intimidated, the children felt honored to be included in such an important celebration. The groom turned to face the aisle, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to pure joy as he prepared to see his bride for the first time in her wedding dress. The children watched his face change and understood, even at their young ages, that they were witnessing something profound and beautiful. Love was about to be celebrated in the most magnificent way possible, and they had helped to create the perfect setting for that celebration. The great doors of the abbey began to move again, and a hush fell over the congregation. The bride's moment had arrived, and the children who had so beautifully prepared the way now stood ready to witness the next chapter of this unforgettable day. The bride appeared at the entrance of Westminster Abbey like a vision from a dream, and even the children who had been trying so hard to stand still and quiet let out small gasps of wonder. Her dress was more magnificent than anything they had ever imagined, made of ivory silk that seemed to glow in the light streaming through the ancient windows. The long veil flowed behind her like a cloud, and her tiara sparkled with diamonds that had been worn by queens for generations. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched the bride begin her own walk down the aisle. This was the moment they had all been preparing for, and seeing it unfold felt like watching magic come to life. The bride moved with such grace and dignity that she seemed to float rather than walk, her face radiant with happiness as she approached the altar where her future husband waited. The page boys watched with professional interest as the bride's much longer train followed behind her, carried by adult attendants who had taken over their duties for this crucial moment. James felt proud that he and his fellow page boys had successfully delivered the train to this point, making them an important part of the bride's journey to the altar. Their small contribution had helped create this perfect moment. Sophie had forgotten all about standing still and was staring at the bride with her mouth slightly open, completely mesmerized by the fairy tale princess walking toward them. Charlotte gently touched her arm to remind her to maintain proper posture, but she too was finding it difficult to look away from the incredible sight unfolding before them. The music swelled to its most glorious heights as the bride continued her procession, and the children felt as though they were standing inside a symphony. The organ's powerful voice seemed to make the very stones of the abbey vibrate with joy, while the choir's voices soared above everything else like angels celebrating from heaven itself. As the bride drew closer, the children could see the intricate details of her dress more clearly. Thousands of tiny pearls had been sewn into delicate patterns across the bodice, and the sleeves were made of the finest lace that looked like it had been woven by fairy hands. The train they had carried so carefully was even more beautiful when seen as part of the complete ensemble. Flowing behind her like liquid starlight, the groom's face was transformed by pure love and wonder as he watched his bride approach. The children, observing this display of emotion from their unique vantage point, were witnessing something that would teach them about love and commitment for years to come. Even at their young ages, they could sense that they were seeing something rare and precious unfold before their eyes. When the bride finally reached the altar, she turned to smile at the children who had helped begin her journey down the aisle. Her expression was filled with gratitude and warmth, and each child felt personally acknowledged for their contribution to her special day. Emma felt her heart swell with pride and happiness, knowing that she had played a part in creating this perfect moment. The Archbishop stepped forward to begin the ceremony, his voice carrying clearly throughout the abbey as he welcomed the congregation to witness the marriage. The children remained perfectly still, their earlier nervousness replaced by a sense of reverence and wonder at being present for such a sacred occasion. From their position near the altar, the children could observe not just the bride and groom, but also the faces of their families in the front rows. Parents, grandparents, and siblings watched with expressions of joy, pride, and love that made the entire ceremony feel like a celebration of not just two people, but of the families and communities that had brought them together. The bride's veil caught the light as she turned to face her groom, and the children saw how the ancient traditions of the abbey seemed to bless this modern love story. The same stones that had witnessed royal coronations and historic ceremonies were now witnessing a young couple promising to love each other forever. with a group of children as their special witnesses. As the formal ceremony began, the children understood that their most important work was now to be quiet and respectful observers, but they also knew that they would forever be part of this story. The young attendants who had helped create one of the most beautiful wedding processions in the Abbey's long and magnificent history. The wedding ceremony unfolded with all the majesty and tradition that Westminster Abbey could provide. But for the children standing near the altar, it became a lesson in patience, wonder, and the power of love. As the Archbishop began to speak about marriage and commitment, the flower girls and page boys found themselves trying to understand words and concepts that were far beyond their years, yet somehow made perfect sense in the magical atmosphere surrounding them. Emma discovered that from her position, she could see not only the bride and groom, but also the reactions of the guests throughout the Abbey. When the couple exchanged their first vows, she watched as hardened politicians wiped away tears and stern-faced military officers smiled with unexpected tenderness. The power of the moment was affecting everyone present, regardless of their age or position in life. Little Sophie had initially struggled with standing still for so long, but as the ceremony progressed, she became completely absorbed in watching the bride's face. The happiness radiating from the new wife was so bright and genuine that Sophie found herself smiling without even realizing it. Infected by the pure joy surrounding the altar, the page boys maintained their disciplined posture throughout the service, but James noticed that even the most serious adults in the congregation seemed to soften as they witnessed the couple's promises to each other. The vows were spoken with such sincerity and emotion that the ancient words seemed fresh and new, as if they were being said for the very first time in the Abbey's 1,000-year history. When the time came for the exchange of rings, the children watched in fascination as the small golden circles were blessed and placed on trembling fingers. Charlotte whispered very quietly to the girl next to her that the rings looked like tiny crowns, which seemed perfectly appropriate for what felt like the coronation of a new royal couple. The choir's voices filled the Abbey during the hymns, and the children felt as though they were standing inside a heavenly chorus. The music seemed to lift everyone present, creating a sense of unity among the diverse congregation that transcended all the usual boundaries of nationality, politics, and social class. In that moment, everyone in the Abbey was simply a witness to love. William, one of the page boys, found himself thinking about his own parents and how they must have felt on their wedding day. Watching the ceremony from such close proximity gave him a new understanding of what marriage meant, and he promised himself that someday he would find someone who would look at him the way the bride was looking at her new husband. As the ceremony reached its climax, the children could feel the anticipation building throughout the Abbey. 2,000 guests held their breath as the Archbishop prepared to pronounce the couple husband and wife. The moment seemed to stretch out forever, filled with the weight of history and the promise of the future. When the words, "You may kiss the bride," finally rang through the ancient stones, the children watched as the couple shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The Abbey erupted in gentle applause and the children clapped enthusiastically, their formal composure finally giving way to the natural excitement of witnessing something wonderful. The organ burst into the recessional music with such power and joy that the children felt their hearts soar along with the melody. The newly married couple turned to face the congregation, their faces glowing with happiness, and began their walk back down the aisle as husband and wife. The transformation was remarkable. They had entered as individuals but were leaving as a united family. The children knew that their ceremonial duties were about to resume, as they would need to follow the couple back down the aisle for the recessional. But for a moment they simply stood and absorbed the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. They had been present for something that would be remembered and celebrated for generations, and their young hearts were filled with a sense of accomplishment and wonder. Emma looked around at her fellow flower girls and page boys, seeing her own amazement reflected in their faces. They had started the day as nervous children worried about making mistakes, but they were ending it as proud participants in one of the most beautiful ceremonies any of them would ever witness. The recessional began with the same grandeur as the processional, but now the atmosphere was transformed by pure celebration and joy. The newly married couple led the way down the aisle, their faces radiant with happiness as they walked together for the first time as husband and wife. Behind them, the children reformed their procession, But this time they moved with the confidence of experienced participants rather than nervous beginners. Emma fell into step behind the couple, no longer carrying rose petals but instead carrying the memory of the most beautiful day of her young life. The guests on either side of the aisle were standing and applauding, their faces bright with joy and celebration. Many were calling out congratulations and best wishes, creating a tunnel of love and support for the new family to walk through. The page boys once again took their positions with the bride's train, but now the task felt familiar and comfortable rather than intimidating. James led his fellow attendants with the confidence of someone who had successfully completed an important mission. The silk fabric flowed behind them as gracefully as it had during the processional, but now it seemed to dance with celebration rather than nervous anticipation. Sophie, the youngest flower girl, had completely overcome her earlier shyness and was practically skipping down the aisle, her face glowing with excitement and pride. She waved at guests she recognized and beamed at the cameras, finally understanding that she was part of something truly magical that people all over the world were celebrating. As they made their way back through the Abbey, the children could see that the congregation was even more emotional during the recessional than they had been during the processional. Tears of joy flowed freely, and the applause was thunderous and sustained. The combination of the magnificent music, the historic setting, and the genuine love they had all witnessed had created something truly unforgettable. The stained glass windows that had captivated Sophie earlier now seemed to glow even more brightly, as if the joy of the occasion had brought new life to the ancient colored glass. The afternoon sunlight streaming through them painted the entire procession in rainbow colors, creating a scene that looked like something from a fairy tale come to life. Charlotte looked back over her shoulder as they walked, and was amazed to see the entire length of the Abbey filled with standing guests, all celebrating the couple's new beginning. The red carpet beneath their feet was now decorated with the rose petals they had scattered hours earlier, creating a beautiful path that marked their contribution to this historic day. When they finally reached the great doors of the Abbey, the children could hear the sounds of celebration continuing outside. Crowds of well-wishers had gathered in the streets, and the bells of London were ringing in celebration of the royal wedding. The children realized that their participation in this ceremony had made them part of something that extended far beyond the Abbey walls. As they stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, the children were greeted by the sight of thousands of people lining the streets, all cheering and waving flags in celebration. The noise was overwhelming but wonderful, a joyous cacophony of voices celebrating love and happiness. The children waved back at the crowds, finally understanding the full magnitude of the event they had helped to create. Later, as the children were reunited with their families, each one carried with them memories that would last a lifetime. They had walked down the most famous aisle in the world, had stood in the presence of royalty and world leaders, and had been part of a ceremony that had touched the hearts of millions of people around the globe. Emma hugged her parents tightly, trying to find words to describe the incredible experience she had just lived through. But some experiences are too big and too beautiful for words, and this was one of them. She knew that for the rest of her life, whenever she heard wedding music or saw a bride in white, she would remember the day she helped create magic at Westminster Abbey. Years later, when the children had grown up and had families of their own, they would still gather occasionally to reminisce about their shared experience. They would show their own children the photographs and videos of that magnificent day, explaining how sometimes ordinary young people get the chance to be part of something extraordinary, something that reminds the whole world of the power of love, tradition, and the simple beauty of children bringing joy to even the most formal occasions. The wedding had ended, but the memories and the magic they had helped to create would live on forever, a testament to the timeless appeal of love stories and the special role that children play in celebrating life's most precious moments.